Profession by Isaac Asimov, top of page 10. But then it all ended when a woman's voice sounded loudly over the public address system. There was an instant silence everywhere. George dropped his fists and forgot Trevelyan. "Children," said the voice, "we're going to call out your names. As each child is called, he or she is going to one of the men waiting along the side walls. Do you see them? They are wearing red uniforms, so they will be easy to find. The girls will go to the right. The boys will go to the left. Now look about and see which man in red is nearest to you." George found his man at a glance and waited for his name to be called off. He had not been introduced before to the sophistications of the alphabet, and the length of time it took to reach his own name grew disturbing. The crowd of children thinned. Little rivulets made their way to each of the red-clad guides. When the name George Playton was finally called, his sense of relief was exceeded only by the feeling of pure gladness at the fact that Stubby Trevelyan still stood in his place, uncalled. George shouted back over his shoulder as he left, "Yay, Stubby! Maybe they don't want you." That moment of gaiety quickly left. He was herded into a line and directed down corridors in the company of strange children. They all looked at one another, large-eyed and concerned, but beyond a snuffling, quitcher-pushing, and "Hey, watch out," there was no conversation. They were handed little slips of paper which they were told must remain with them. George stared at his curiously. Little black marks of different shapes. He knew it to be printing, but how could anyone make words out of it? He couldn't imagine. He was told to strip. He and 4 other boys, who were all that now remained together. All the new clothes came shucking off, and 4 8-year-olds stood naked and small, shivering more out of embarrassment than cold. Medical technicians came past, probing them, testing them with little odd instruments, pricking them for blood. Each took the little cards and made additional marks on them with little black rods that produced the marks, all neatly lined up with great speed. George stared at the new marks, but they were no more comprehensible than the old. The children were ordered back into their clothes. They sat on little chairs and then waited again. Names were called again, and George Playton came third. He moved into a large room filled with frightening instruments with knobs and glossy panels in front. There was a desk in the very center, and behind it a man sat, his eyes on the papers piled before him. He said, "George Playton?" "Yes, sir," said George in a shaky whisper. All this waiting and all this going here and going there was making him nervous. He wished it were over. The man behind the desk said, "I am Dr. Lloyd. George, how are you?" The doctor didn't look up as he spoke. It was as though he had said those words over and over again, and he didn't have to look up anymore. "I'm all right." "Are you afraid, George?" No, sir," said George, sounding afraid even in his own ears. "That's good," said the doctor, "because there's nothing to be afraid of, you know. Let's see, George. It says here on your card that your father's named Peter and that he's a registered pipe fitter, and your mother is named Amy and is a registered home technician. Is that correct?" Yes, sir." "And your birthday is 13 February, and you had an ear infection about a year ago, right?" "Yes, sir." "Do you know how I know all these things?" "It's on the card, I think, sir." "That's right." The doctor looked up at George for the first time and smiled. He showed even teeth,